Today on Metcast, I am joined by Pat Ragazzo. We're going to be breaking down all the New York moves, the hot stove. Bring your questions and comments. We'll get to them very quickly next on Metcast. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Metcast. Today, I'm joined by Pat Ragazzo. Yes, we've had him in our spaces before, but now it's time to bring him on the YouTube channel. Give us a sub or like if you're enjoying this content. But Pat, what is going on, my guy?
What's up, Ray? I'm doing well, enjoying the off season while it's still a little quiet. Spring training's right around the corner, and so is the 8-month marathon that is baseball season every year. Yeah. So that's kind of creeping up already, but just trying to stay relaxed until the race starts. So yeah, I hope you're doing well, and thanks for having me back on.
Of course. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding. I want to get to this Pete Alonso situation right away. A lot of controversy. Supposedly the Mets were in on 3 years, $90 million. Turns out that Will Salmon reported it wasn't as much, but supposedly they did give him the opt-outs, and he's still shopping out there. You see, Santander got that 5-year contract from the Blue Jays, which I actually think hurts Pete Alonso. Something different. What are your initial opinions on the Pete Alonso situation?
You mentioned Santander. Pete Alonso is a better player, and they're the same age, by the way. Santander turned 30 in October. Pete Alonso turned 30 in December. Pete Alonso is a better player in every way, shape, and form when you look at the comparisons of their careers and how their careers have gone. Even defensively, Pete Alonso is not a defensive whiz, but he's definitely not a liability at first base and plays his position much better defensively than Santander does as an outfielder. Santander is a switch hitter, but Pete Alonso has more power. He has more power probably than anybody in the league besides Aaron Judge. And Alonso's hit the second most home runs in baseball since making his debut in 2019 compared to Judge. So I think that it kind of maybe helps Alonso. I guess time will tell, but Santander's contract, I mean, again, like Pete Alonso's worth more than that. I don't think that Santander is really good. Santander is going to become a DH probably towards the end of his career, like Alonso is going to. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why Alonso didn't get the contract that he has been seeking or hasn't so far. And it doesn't look like he's going to be able to get that long-term deal this offseason. But I talked about this on Picks 11 the other night with Kate Rooney on Sunday. And I just said, like, it's so different from what we saw in the 2010s, a decade ago, with Albert Pujols, Miguel Cabrera, mm-hmm. Prince Fielder, like Hall of Fame-esque players there at first base were getting paid, but none of those contracts worked out. And now first basemen get paid like running backs, and that's kind of what's happened with Pete Alonso here. I mean, it is unlikely that he comes back to the Mets at this point in time, just because negotiations haven't gone the way that either side expected, I think. And I feel like mm-hmm. the Mets made him a fair offer, the 3 years, around $70 million with the opt-outs, and he rejected it. So that offer's not on the table anymore. And if there is an avenue for Pete Alonso to come back to the Mets, it's going to be because there's nothing out there that would, overshadow or I should say be better than the situation that he would have with the Mets, even if he just plans on coming back here for a 1-year deal or a deal and opt-out after short-term deal and opt-out after the first year and retest the market next year. So maybe Pete Alonso's camp reinitiates contact. We have heard that they have still talked recently and that it's still on the table and the door's not closed, but the Mets aren't going to wait forever. And from people I've talked to, the Mets are fully prepared to shift to that plan B of Mark Vientos playing first base and then having Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, and Luis Angel Acuna competing for the third base job. The Mets right now, that's looked at within the organization as the most realistic plan B if Alonso does in fact leave.
Pat, and this is not at you, and I know I speak for a lot of Met fans when I say this. How can you sell this fan base on trying to win a World Series when you bring in – I would love to know what those conversations with Juan Soto are. We're going to win. We're going to win now. We're going to win tomorrow. We're going to win in the future. But by the way, we're going to let our best power bat walk, and we're going to bring up a guy that's got a 215 batting average with a sub 600 OPS, and he's going to be your protection in the lineup. It doesn't make sense. Like, you have Jose Siri, 188 batting average, Brett Beatty, who can't hit at all. Let's just be honest, until proven otherwise. The guy's 25 now. Alvarez, who's coming off a down year. Nimmo's got the bum foot. The bottom half of this lineup without Alonso looks so naked, for lack of a better term. You're telling me there's no other plan B? Like, I know we've heard the rumors for a while, and I assume with the Santander signing, the Vladdy crap is completely out the window because they're going to do everything in their power to get him. And now we're also hearing that they still may be in on Alonso. Is there any truth to that?
Well, it was reported in the last few days that the Blue Jays have an offer on the table for Alonso, and nothing's been accepted. Nothing sounds like it's close. So it doesn't sound like it's the numbers and even the years. We don't know, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be a deal that gets done with Alonso unless things change here. We hear that there's progression towards them maybe coming up on an agreement. I mean, the Blue Jays, everybody in the baseball department right now for the Toronto Blue Jays is pretty much on the hot seat right now. Mark Shapiro's headed into his final year of his Ross Atkins is really, really on a hot seat right now. So they do need to do whatever it takes to extend Vlad, and they should sign Alonso. Like they should extend Vlad, sign Alonso. They have Santander. Does that make them a playoff contender? I mean, not necessarily when you look at their roster, but at the same time, if Bo Bichette bounces back, Vladdy has a big year, Pete has a big year. I mean, I can't say bounce back. He wasn't put up pretty decently strong numbers, just not to his standards last year, and had a big postseason. And Santander coming off a career year with Baltimore. The Blue Jays, if they have enough pitching, there's no reason why they can't compete for a wild card spot in the American League. The AL is very, very weak, as it was last year too. So I think that I know it's unlikely right now with Vlad Jr. and the Mets, at least when talking about a trade in the offseason, but there's rumors that there's a self-imposed deadline that Vladdy set, that it's the first day of workouts for spring training on February 17th. And if it's
a couple weeks away.
Yeah. And it's coming up fast, the date. And if they can't extend Vladdy, they should trade him for a haul of prospects. They're not going to get more than they would in the offseason as opposed to the deadline. They're not going to get as big of a package if it's a half a season, not even rental piece at the trade deadline. So it would be a package that, from what I've heard of talking to people, that the Blue Jays would get more for Vladdy than the Padres got for Juan Soto last year when they made that trade with the Yankees. So
does that make sense too, if we're being honest? Because Soto could play left or right. Vladdy's not going back to third. And when we look around the contending teams in MLB, not the Yankees. They already have Goldschmidt. They have Stanton. They're kind of clogged there. He's not going to the Dodgers. He's not going to San Diego. He's not going to Philly. I mean, how many teams are going to be willing to give up that massive hole the Yankees did and extend him? Because if you're trading for that, plan A's got to be extending him. And they all saw what happened. Let's just say in a strange world, Pete Alonso does not come back to the New York Mets, you have to assume this offseason they're the number one contender. And Steve Cohen's already said, if I want a player, I am going to get him a la Juan Soto. And I think he would do that again for a guy like Vladdy, who'll be going into his age 27 season. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And then I got a quick chat that I think is really good that just came in.
If Vladdy goes to free agency next year, the Mets and Yankees are going to be battling it out like they battled out for Juan Soto. It's not going to be a record-setting contract, but it's going to be pretty massive with what we wind up seeing from Vladdy getting on a long-term deal. What I will say about a possible trade, and everybody in the industry who I talk to says that there's no way they're trading him right now. But let's say, that we'll play devil's advocate that Vladdy doesn't sign an extension with the Blue Jays. I think that a trade becomes more likely before the season starts if they don't sign him to an extension. And to even add to that and make it a little more spicy, the Mets, if they don't bring back Alonso, could very well be in on a trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. if he's available before the season starts. And yes, it would cost a lot in prospects, but the Mets are the team who have the bandwidth and the financial backing of Steve Cohen and the aggression to, in this win now mode, especially after they signed Soto, to extend Vladdy even before the season. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to happen before the season. I mean, they wouldn't have much time to work with if they trade for him in spring training, but it's something that at least is intriguing and seems like it's not totally dead, at least when you look at it from the Mets perspective, if Vladdy doesn't get the extension done, if the Blue Jays don't get the extension done with Vladdy. So I would not say that that's dead at this point in time until they put pen to paper and Vladdy is extended. Then I would say it's kaput.
I agree with you. We have this from Zach, and I was thinking the same thing. Hey, Pat, thanks so much for coming on. Do you see a low-risk signing coming, like a Jan Moncada, Justin Turner, who I think could be an interesting option, or could they bring in Hai-Sung Kim from the Padres?
When you look at it, unless they bring back Jose Iglesias, let's say they bring back Iglesias, there's your backup utility infielder. Now, Iglesias has expressed his interest that he wants to return, but there's really been nothing to it, at least from anything we've all heard, anything I've heard this offseason about a reunion. Now, that's not to say that it's unrealistic. I mean, I think it's very realistic to bring him back. Great clubhouse guy. They know they're not going to get the same type of year out of him that he produced in those 85 games, batting, I think, 337, 389 on base, like over at 800 OPS. But unless Luis Angel Acuna wins the third base job and is on the major league roster to start the season.
Third base, you think?
Well, he's going to be competing for the third base job if he enters the first. Jeff
Neal's
going to wind up being the Mets second baseman unless there's an injury in spring training.
I was just thinking because of his size, maybe they wouldn't want that. But that's an interesting take. I haven't heard that yet.
That's a good point. That is a good point too. And that's something that I've heard. Now, the Mets, I believe, will have Brett Beatty and Ronnie Mauricio and Acuna battling for the third base job in spring training if they don't bring back Alonso, and Vientos is indeed the first baseman. But yes, you got to look at the fit. Acuna's size, it doesn't make him a good fit for third base, and he doesn't have the power to play third base. That being said, it pretty much would be Brett Beatty's job to lose and he would get a third shot there because Ronnie Mauricio, they don't even know if he's going to be ready for spring training at this point. He's coming off the torn ACL. He might not even be healthy when spring training starts. So you can't necessarily count on him. Now, I think he has the most upside at this point. I'm a little down on Beatty after the last few years. I know people who work for the Mets are still high on Beatty and think that he could develop into the player who he was expected to be. But I think Mauricio, just the way his power, his potential, his upside, the way he hits the baseball, at least from an offensive standpoint, I think he has the highest ceiling there as an everyday player for the Mets. It's just, is he going to be able to take the third base? You just don't really know. But we also said the same thing about Mark Vientos. And if the Mets bring back Pete or bring in another high caliber first baseman, Vientos is going to continue to play third. Now, Vientos was a negative defender last year, and he wasn't really making the super tough plays, but he's a very strong arm. He definitely held his own. He wasn't a liability at third base, just from what the eye test tells you from watching all year. He was not a liability. This wasn't Wilmer Flores playing shortstop in the 2015 World Series and postseason after Ruben Tejada broke his leg. It definitely was not that. So, and they said the same thing about Pete Alonso, same thing about Michael Conforto's defense when he first came up. I believe Brandon Nimmo was in right field in the beginning of his career, which wasn't a good fit. But yeah, I mean, I think that the Mets do have some internal options here, but yeah, it doesn't exactly instill that much confidence, especially when you look at what the Dodgers have done this offseason, only gotten stronger.
I think most Met fans, including myself, I don't look at what the Dodgers do. I mean, obviously we see it, but I'm more worried about winning the East. And I feel like we're kind of missing out on this pure opportunity. The Braves haven't added anybody. In fact, they lost an ace. The Phillies are standing still. And now after Juan Soto, I think it's very fair to argue, aside from Juan Soto, and yes, he's a great piece, of course, this team is worse heading into this year than it was last year, knowing what we had last year. You don't have Severino. You're replacing them with a bunch of question marks. You don't have a guy who I think the Mets should entertain bringing back on a one-year deal, Jose Quintana, who was very effective for us last year, pitching into 3 ERAs. He's also out there still. So I think the Mets could still add a few short-term pieces if that's what David Stearns is looking to do. And one player I wanted to ask you about, who I thought would be a perfect fit for our New York Mets, we saw them miss out on Teoscar Hernandez, but that signaled to me that we are currently trying to add someone who could play outfield and also swing a nice bat on a short-term contract. Could a guy like Profar be in the books in the future for the New York Mets? Because he has a similar type build. I don't think he's going to get an absolute massive contract. He could play all the positions in the outfield because we are so, aside from Brandon Nimmo's foot, let's be honest. If that foot flares up, we are one player away from seeing Tyron Taylor, Jose Siri, and Juan Soto as an outfield. Though that is two awful bats in the outfield. You already have a question at third base potential with Beatty, a question at catcher with Alvarez, and you're praying to God your batting champ turns the clock back two years. I mean, that's some serious question marks. And I think a full-time DH, because he could sub Brandon Nimmo in the field a lot. Maybe you full-time DH Nimmo until his foot's 100%. Could you see that being a fit?
Well, that's also considering whether Nimmo's going to be ready or not in spring training. And that's going to be asked from the get-go once we all show up in Port St. Lucie in a couple of weeks. Is Brandon Nimmo ready, and what is he doing? And he's going to be there and answer those questions, as is Carlos Mendoza. So I believe that Nimmo has had an offseason to recover, and I don't see why he can't head into the season fully healthy, especially if they put him on a strict workload, or at least monitor his workload, of course, which I'm sure they're going to do in spring training if they have to with his foot, and just kind of ease him back in. Like, I don't think that should be an issue given the treatment he's gone through and given having an offseason to recover and rehabbing it. I just don't think that it should be an issue this year. Yes, if he re-aggravates it or flares up or something, like, yeah, then you could start getting concerned. But the Mets medical staff has really feel like they've taken leaps and bounds the last couple of years and have done a very nice job. I mean, a guy who we might want to talking about later in the show, Ryan Stanek, he came to the Mets and he had a bit of a back issue and he struggled post-trade deadline, and it didn't look like a good pickup. And then he got healthy. They tweaked with his mechanics a little bit, and he was their most reliable reliever, not named Edwin Diaz, for the rest of the way and throughout the postseason. So Brandon Nimmo, I'm not really worried about. I wouldn't be as worried about right now as of this date. But you look at the outfield alignment. The Mets did bring back Jesse Winker, and I know they've been linked to Jerickson Profar recently.
Jesse Winker.
Like they have Starling Marte. They brought back Jesse Winker. Like, they have 6 outfielders on their roster and 2 guys who could probably be DH platoons unless they wind up trading Marte, which they were trying to do.
How likely is that right now? Because I know you had the report on that, the winter meetings. You want to go into that report really quick? I don't know if you've ever spoken. You haven't spoken out publicly here. Would love to hear it.
Yeah, so the Mets were talking to teams about moving Marte in December. They spoke to Marte about that. They were going to try and move him to a better situation. Team like the Royals seems perfect, and the Mets are willing to pay down a portion of his salary to move him and maximize the return. The Royals need bats. The Mets were willing to pay a portion of Marte's $20 million that he's owed in the final year of his deal. He had a pretty productive bounce back year for the Mets, even though he missed 2 months in the summer. But he was a key asset offensively for the Mets down the stretch and in the postseason. And the Mets were talking to the Royals about Hunter Harvey, who had a little bit of a down year last year, and it ended in August, and he was injured. But 2022, 2023, he was a really good relief pitcher, and he's a strikeout guy. And Hunter Harvey would have been a really good addition to the Mets bullpen, but it didn't wind up coming to fruition. But they did discuss that with the Royals during winter meetings, from what I reported. At this point, it doesn't seem too likely. Now, things could change, and obviously things could change tonight, tomorrow, in the next few days. You never know. And front offices are always opportunistic. The Mets are being opportunistic, as they are year in and year out. Any MLB front offices and operates that way. But right now, it doesn't. There's not really much buzz, or even as close to as much buzz as there were about Marte and trade scenarios and trade buzz as there were last month, especially around the winter meetings. It's just something that right now doesn't really look realistic, but it still definitely could happen.
Now, do you think Marte axed out, or is that the Mets just approaching? Because what would be a better situation a better situation? I guess they knew they were going to be in on Juan Soto potentially getting him, and he wants to be a full-time player. But at this point in his career, he can't stay healthy. So maybe being that platoon DH with Nimmo, maybe they go back and forth for this season.
The best situation for Marte is going to a team where he's going to DH every day and play a little bit of outfield. That's how I see it. I think that's how the Royals maybe saw it at the time, and other teams when the Mets were talking to other teams. And at that point, they were trying to acquire relief pitching. As I mentioned, they talked about Hunter Harvey. So, yeah, I believe that would be the best situation for Marte, is to get every day at bats, mostly as a DH. And I feel like this situation is perfect for him, but he hasn't been a platoon player for his whole career. I mean, a little bit last year once he came back and they had Winker, like, Marte wasn't necessarily playing every day. It was kind of a little bit of a rotation, but he was productive. So I think something like that would be a good situation for him. And I think that the Mets maybe are a little surprised that Alonso hasn't come, that they haven't been able to get anything done with Alonso. So Marte is being counted on to hit. That's why he's with the Mets. And if he remains with the Mets, it's because he just adds more to the offensive firepower. And I know you're going through the options and everything, and there are a lot of question marks.
Right.
But this is essentially the same team minus Alonso and Iglesias, but adding Juan Soto. So the Mets essentially swapped 40 home runs for 40 home runs, and a player who, I mean, Soto, the Mets feel that they can improve Soto's defense with the data that they have and the strategy that they have in place. And they talked to him about that during the recruitment process. But Jose Siri replaces Harrison Bader. And Jose Siri, I know he didn't have a good year offensively, but this is a guy who has 25 home run potential, and he's done that at the big league level before. That's more upside than Harrison Bader, and he's even a better statistical center fielder defensively than Harrison Bader was, which Harrison Bader was the best defensive center fielder in baseball when the Mets got him last year, and now that's Jose. Right. That's gone to Jose Siri. So that's the other thing about like adding a Jerickson Profar, adding another outfielder doesn't make sense to me, and the Mets were mainly talking about it before they brought Winker back. Now, I know, again, that the report about Profar came out recently, but I really just don't see it as a fit unless the deal is such a bargain and they feel like he could improve their offense and also move a player like Marte in the process, because I just don't see the Mets moving Nimmo, especially you mentioned we've been talking about Nimmo's plantar fasciitis. I don't see even a healthy Nimmo being a good option as an everyday center fielder, and Soto playing left or right. Like, I just don't think that the Mets want to weaken their defense that way. They strengthened their defense. They didn't necessarily strengthen their offense too much. Maybe they stayed the same with swapping Soto for Alonso. Maybe got a little better. We don't know that yet, but they certainly improved their defense. And you look at first base too, like they're not necessarily going to weaken their outfield when Mark Vientos is going to have to learn first base potentially if they don't bring Alonso back or bring in another first baseman. And you look at the projections, and Vientos could wind up having a sophomore slump, or the move to first base could wind up affecting his offense. I know it's a different position, but we saw that happen with Gleyber Torres in 2021, where the Yankees made him a full-time shortstop, and it really, really affected his offense. And then once they moved him back to second, then he started hitting again. So yeah, you just never know. It is a lot to ask of a young player. I think Mark Vientos could handle it, but we just don't at this point.
So I have this, and I think Richard hit the nail on the head here. Look at our pitching staff compared to the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Phillies, and the Mariners. That's one thing that I wanted to ask you. Is there any chance we add to this current staff? Because when we even looking just at the National League, Sean Manaea had one great year in the last 6 years, one great year in last year, and he's getting paid for it. You need him to emulate that. You need Senga to stay healthy. You need Montas to turn into what Severino was. You lost Quintana. There's a lot of moving pieces there where I think it's very easy to say we have the third best pitching staff, maybe the fourth. I don't know what the Marlins are going to be this year, but in the division, are they going to add to this potentially? Could you see a trade maybe for a Castillo coming down the line? Maybe Jack Flaherty's out there. Doesn't look like he's going to be going back to the Dodgers unless they're going to have a 9-man rotation. I mean, you let me know your thoughts.
Once the Mets brought back Sean Manaea and they brought in Griffin Canning, they have Tyler McGill. Jose Butto could be used as starting depth. He'll probably be used as a long reliever, but he'll probably stay stretched out. They brought in Montas. They brought in Clay Holmes. And they're hoping that Senga stays healthy this year. And I mean, Senga did have a injury-riddled season last year, as we all know. He had a great Rookie of the Year the year before that in 2023. Mm-hmm. There were some concerns coming out of Japan, some injury concerns, which is why probably he only got around 5 years, $75 million from the Mets. And some teams maybe stayed away from him when he came out and was posted from Japan. But if Senga's healthy, Manaea, the Mets figured something out with him last year, especially midseason with the adjustment in June or July. And that at least has more promise than Manaea going elsewhere. And then that team having to get the information from him that what was working for him and what he did and get their hands on him and how they feel they could get the most out of him. The Mets already did that. And yes, they'll be able to kind of pick up where they left off. Frankie Montas looked good once he went to the Brewers last year. I think that now that he's finally healthy, he could maybe get back to kind of that pitcher that we saw in 2021, 2022 before he hurt his shoulder. Shoulders are tricky, very tricky with pitchers, of course. I mean, Senga had the shoulder injury last year as well. But I think that the Mets are pretty confident right now with their pitching lab and the resources they have that they get their hands on a lot of pitchers and get the most out of them, as we saw last year where, last year we talked about how they didn't have an ace, and Senga was out basically the entire year. And even with Senga, they didn't necessarily have a frontline starter. But look at what they were able to do last year with Minaya, Quintana, Severino. Like said, those were big question marks going into the year and even at the start of the year, and they were able to make it work. The one concern that I have is that these guys ran out of gas in the postseason, and the Mets didn't match up well with the Dodgers, and nobody does now this winter as we progress, and the Dodgers have made more moves. But I think that the Mets do have they will wind up having enough if Senga stays healthy. And if they don't, they're going to make a trade at the trade deadline. And we can talk about that on offense as well. If they do go into the season with Mark Vientos at first and one of the young guys at third base and don't add another star hitter, star bat, they're going to have to make a trade at the deadline. And that the Mets have the resources to do so. And I think a lot of teams are always kind of go into the season that way. Like not everybody answers all of their question marks unless they're the Los Angeles Dodgers, and then that's what the trade deadline's for, where they look to improve.
Yeah, that's it. I got this from Jake Brown. We're gonna leave off with this, guys. I'll be sticking around after Pat leaves us. Thank you so much for your time. I got a couple things I want to go over that SNY broke down. We got Billy Wagner making it to the Hall of Fame. Shout out to him. We got a couple other things to break down, where the Mets could be. A couple of the guys at SNY, we have a few videos to break down. So I'll be sticking with you after this final question to Pat. If you're enjoying this content, please like and subscribe. Give us a follow over on YouTube. That's how we bring you this content. We have this from Jake Brown Radio, and I totally agree with Jake. 2 years, $22 million for Profar makes a ton of sense. First baseman, backups, Nimmo, everyone else.
Well, that's the identical deal that they gave AJ Minter. So, shout out to Jake though. Jake's the man. But I just don't. I would have to look at his fan graphs. But what experience does Profar have playing first base? I mean, it's not too much. It's not like he's a great defensive outfielder. Again, I just don't think he fits defensively. But if the Mets were to bring him in, they would probably have to trade a Marte and use Profar as a DH and backup outfielder. And if they want to try him at first base, they can. But I don't necessarily see him as an everyday first base option. I mean, this isn't necessarily Scott Hatterberg and Moneyball and the Oakland A's. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll find out. But I think preferably when building a team and building a contender and adding to what they have, the Mets would like to have an actual first baseman. So I guess we'll see how this plays out with Alonso, where he winds up and if he does wind up back, and if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. signs that extension with the Blue Jays, then the Mets are running out of options. Yeah. So again, from what I've heard and what I've been told, Mark Vientos is probably the realistic plan B right now as of this date if Alonso doesn't come back.
I just don't see Vladimir wanting to stay in Toronto. Think about that division alone. You have 3 teams that are no doubt better than you. I don't care you add Santander. In my opinion, Boston's better. Look what Boston added. A legitimate ace. They're probably going to add Bregman. So they're adding legitimate pieces there. They have one of the best farm systems in all of baseball. These guys are going to be coming up shortly. The Yankees aren't in decline. And if we're being honest, the Orioles, even though they lost out on Santander and Burns, they still have a top-flight farm system, and they still have a hell of a team. So I don't see Toronto competing anytime soon. And how many years of your youth are you going to give up, number one? And number two, it is about the money. And it is about sometimes playing with other elite players. And coming to the Mets and signing an extension here, you're with Lindor, you're with Soto, you're with Vientos. Where are you going to get protection like that in Toronto? That's just my thought.
There's one last point I'll make about that with Toronto and Vlad. Like we mentioned earlier in the show, all these guys are on notice. Mark Shapiro this is the last year of his deal, and he probably won't be back. Ross Atkins on the hot seat and very much in danger of losing his job. The Blue Jays need to go all in. They signed Santander. They need to extend Vladdy. They should sign Alonso. They signed Hoffman. They still could sign Carlos Estevez if they want. They need enough pitching, but they need the bats and they need the power. And with Santander, Vladdy, a bounce back Bo Bichette, and Pete Alonso. But I don't really love Vladdy playing third base. He wants to go back to playing third base. I think that DHing and having Santander play the outfield is probably the best course of action. But I don't know. That's above my pay grade, and I don't work in the Toronto baseball operations department or on their coaching staff. But I will say they're trying to save their jobs there this year. And how are they going to do that? By making the postseason. And that gives them the best shot, is extending Vlad And because what if they traded him for prospects, they're punting on this season. Even if they signed Alonso, they're punting on this season.
Well,
And
I also guess it depends what kind of prospects. The reason why, and I know I'm coming from a Mets fan perspective, so I got to keep that in perspective. But if I'm Toronto and I'm saying I still want to compete, maybe not this year, because let's be honest, Pat, you think they're competing for the East this year as it stands right now with Vladdy?
no, but the AL is wide open and very weak, so they could easily.
I agree with you with that. My thing is this: if they want prospects that are pretty much major league ready, and I know you might not have a ton of value, but the Mets could give up a 24-year-old Drew Gilbert, a 25-year-old Brett Beatty, a 24-year-old Ronnie Mauricio, and then if you got to throw a Jonathan Tongue in there and maybe another older prospect, it's not like the Mets would be sending them back these 19, 20-year-old kids. These guys are ready. I think it's fair to say Mauricio was supposed to be on the big league roster all last year, if not for that injury. Same with Brett Beatty, but he's struggling, but I guess he still has promise. The Mets still think he has promise. Jonathan Tongue's a top 10 pitcher in their organization. He's a little bit older. He's 23 right now, so he's not light years away. If they want to compete maybe not this year, but the following year, and now they'll be set at a few positions potentially. I think it's just a good matchup where maybe a year or two ago, I'm not saying that with the Mets. They have done wonders to rebuild this farm system, and let's be honest, Pat. There's way too many players. You still have Acuna, Jet Williams. You can go up and down. Carson Bayes, who jumped in the top 100. He's coming out of college. He's going to be 23 years old. You have all these guys and no places for them.
It makes sense as a matchup, as a trade partner with the Blue Jays, but not when people's jobs are on the line. Like I
agree. I agree. Unfortunately, we've seen that in other sports.
Yeah, I heard it's very unlikely. I mean, again, I think that it becomes likely if they don't extend Vlad, but I've heard that it's unlikely they're going to trade him because yes, their jobs are all on the line right now in Toronto. And yeah, they'd be taking a big chance, even though they do. Yes, the Mets do have some kind of close to major league ready prospects and Beatty and all these guys. But again, it would be a big risk for Toronto as opposed to just they have to be all in to save their jobs and they have to make the postseason this year in a weak AL. And that's what they're going to do. The more sure thing is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. not counting on Brett Beatty and guys like that in a trade. And then a lot of development's going to go into that. Like that's a big risk, and probably more so the odds leaning towards losing your job if you do make a trade like that. And as far as like whether it's going to work out or not, I would say probably no, or at least not right away. And they don't have time to do that. They're all in. That's the risk of putting people on notice.
Right.
And keeping people like that because they're making desperation moves to save their jobs.
5 years for Santander. Who else?
They're not making moves. They're not making moves for the better of the organization and the future of the organization. They're making moves for right now for short-term success, which could hurt their long-term success and very much probably will, with the exception of signing Vladdy long-term. I think that's a good move. But yeah, and also when you're talking about a Mets trade with the Blue Jays, you mentioned some of the guys like, yeah, I think Beatty makes a lot of sense. Tong maybe, but like it's going to probably start with Brandon Sproat, Jet Williams, Acuna. Like the Mets are going to have to give up a ton. It's not just them saying, here's Beatty, here's a lower or mid-tier prospect who's almost, a couple years from the majors and, might pan out. Like, no, they're going to have to give up their top prospects in the organization, and it's going to be multiple, and it's going to be way more than what the Padres got for Juan Soto.
I agree. All right, Pat, where can people find you and your works?
You can check out my work at si.com/MLB/Mets, and you can follow me on Twitter at Ragazzo Report, Ragazzo Report. You can also shoot me a follow on Instagram at that handle as well. So, Ray, this was fun. Thanks for having me on. It's always great to chop it up with you and talk about the Mets.
Of course, we'll have you back maybe before the season starts. Pat, thanks so much. Catch you soon, bro.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, that is Pat Ragazzo. We're going to be sticking around. I got a few videos that I want to go over with you guys. I'm going to get to some of your chats right now. Shout out to 1,000 people in this live. Shout out to you guys. Thanks so much for joining us. I love doing this. I know I'm not your average YouTuber. I don't have all the fancy stuff all around me. I'm just an average fan talking with you guys, trying to bring on some of the best guests to have on, you know what I mean? Some of the guys who actually cover the team for a living and get some of your questions in. Unfortunately, Pat couldn't give us a ton of time today, not as much as Salmon gave us, but I'm working on a couple more guests. I've been talking with John Arazi about getting Terry Collins on here for you guys. We had him over on my other show, and I'd like to get him on here for you guys so you guys can get questions answered. We also are working on a couple other guests, some of the hosts that work over at WFAN. No, not Brandon Tierney. He will not come back on my show for some reason because we proved him wrong. Brandon said we were shot. We were done last year in June. He came on my show. We had a back and forth argument, and turns out I was right. And ever since I was right, he won't come back. I don't know. Maybe I'll shoot him another DM, ask him to come on. I think he owes us one. I think he owes you one because you and I were both right. The Mets were not done and out of it last June, but that's what we're trying to do here. Let's get to some of these chats really quick that I have starred up. Shout out to Zach. Zach is one of our moderators in the chat, Zach Latham. If you ever have an issue or anything, feel free to reach out to him. Give him a follow over on X. Give us a follow over on X and shoot us that sub on YouTube because it helps. It does. It helps the channel grow. We're big on Facebook now. Been doing a lot of Facebook stuff. So I appreciate you guys chiming in. We got this from Nicholas. Why would anybody want to come to the Mets after watching what they're doing with Alonso? Not sure Soto would have signed if he would have saw this thing coming down the pipe. I will say this. Soto came because of the money. Soto came because of the money. $5 million he left the New York Yankees. Think about that. Think about that. And it's not like the Mets are never going to spend. I think a lot of us, let's be honest, including myself, I'm overreacting. The Dodgers are going to have probably a $500 million payroll when it all comes down. I think with today's signing of the relief pitcher, his name's escaping my head. You can let me know down in the chat. I think they're at like $399 plus the tax, so they're well over $400 million. At the end of the day, if you win, it brings in revenue and you could reinvest it into the team. That's why I don't know if this Vlad Guerrero Jr. trade would actually happen, which I would be, guys. I'm not giving up Brandon Sproat. I would give up a Jet Williams. I would give up a Drew Gilbert. I would give up an Acuna if he's willing to sign an extension. Think about that 4-batter lineup: Lindor, Soto, Vientos, and Vladdy. That is ridiculous, in my opinion. Big B-Mac. Big Pete will be back. It's too obvious a good fit. Maybe Big Pete is hoping a dark horse team will jump in, but it's just not going to happen. If it didn't happen by now, it's not happening. Because you know what's happening right now? Teams are finalizing their rosters. And let's be real. A lot of people last year are saying, well, look at Jordan Montgomery. Look at Blake Snell. He is a first baseman alone. And I guarantee you most people, and even Pat just said it on here, he's a negative defensively. He just is. We could all sit here and cite his scoop rate, which I saw somebody do a great breakdown. Last year, I believe he had 99 scoops, Pete Alonso. Out of them, 80 of them were considered like gentleman's scoop, something like that, where it was a designed long hop. And they showed a video. Lindor did it time and time again where Alonso has 15, 20 feet as the ball bounces, and that gets counted as a scoop. So even that stat could be vastly overrated. Shout out to Jake Brown Radio. I know he's got his new podcast. Make sure to check him out. He's over on X as well. Jake, thanks so much for checking in. If Brett Beatty is a starting third baseman day one, I will start eating salad for the first time in my life. I'm actually on one of those salad diets now myself, my friend. I got that stupid cholesterol thing hanging out. I don't know if you guys could tell. I'm actually down like 30 pounds. But since I started this podcast, back in November, it's only been a few months, but shout out to you, Jake. We got this from Ross. I agree. Beatty has been a letdown. However, Austin Riley took a few seasons to become a star. Let's give Brett Beatty a chance. You know what I will say to that, Ross? Go look at Austin Riley's 25-year-old season. I believe he had 38 home runs and he hit 330 or something crazy absurd. Brett Beatty's 25. It's one thing to say to be patient with a guy like Francisco Alvarez, who's 22. He's going through it. He's got to worry about dealing with a pitching staff. He's got to worry about his frame rate. He's got to worry about his defense. That stupid one knee down in the dirt that he shouldn't be doing. We all know it because it relies on pass balls, doesn't allow him to have movement back there, but he's got to worry about his defense. So we're okay with him struggling at the plate. We know the power's there. We know he'll develop. He's 22. Brett Beatty has been coming up for 3 years now. It's not even like Mark Vientos, because Mark Vientos is a year younger. I think and this is what teams get obsessed with, AAA's become the league of hitters. everybody hits at AAA. It used to be, well, if a guy's hitting 300 at AAA, he'll probably hit 260, 265 in the major leagues and be able to develop as he goes along. It's no longer like that because Brett Baty hits 400 at AAA. Go look at his stats down there. He couldn't lift the ball in Major League. He magically goes down there. He's hitting nuke bombs all over the place, hitting home runs to left field, home runs to right field, to dead center. And then we bring him up, and all of a sudden he can't lift the ball again. Maybe a little bit of confidence from last year at AAA. You bring him into spring training. I'm hoping Juan Soto has a big impact on some of these bats. You've seen it in the past. We saw what JD Martinez did last year for this lineup. And I'm hoping the Mets bring in a full-time DH. The better teams in Major League Baseball, whether it's the Yankees, it's the Phillies, it's the Dodgers, they all have legitimate full-time DHs. Maybe a Yandy Diaz, I don't know. But the longer this drags out with Pete, I think he might settle for a one-year deal. But the one thing that does scare me is David Stearns is a man of his word. If he tells you something from what he's been here, he's being honest. Last year, he let us know we were going to try to compete for a wild card seed. And if we were in it, he was going to invest in us at the deadline. That's exactly what he did. But one thing that's interesting, he said right as the offseason started that they are more than willing and open to go to the trade market. So that's what I'm looking for. We need another frontline starter. I know it's going to cost a lot, but look at our rotation. Outside of Manaya and Senga, you're gonna rely on David Peterson with his 2.98 ERA last year to come back and finally be the David Peterson we drafted him in the first round out of Oregon years ago to be. I don't trust that, and neither should you. Let's not be foolish. Remember that year we won 101 games? We all knew it was a miracle. We got a ton of breaks. And this last year, it was a miracle run. We barely made it to the wild card, and we went on a magical run, and no one can take that away from you or me. But if we're being honest, are we really a division contending team this year? In my mind, as it sits right now, no. Now, that could change if Acuna comes up and beats the Acuna he was the last 20 games, which I put out a graphic. He was killing it in Winter Bowl, a finalist for the MVP. His OPS was well over 900, I believe, or right around 900-ish. Stealing a ton of bags. Maybe Brett Baty blossoms. Maybe Mauricio comes back and is the Mauricio. One thing I love is Mauricio looks like a clear athlete out there. But there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts. And even Pat said, yeah, well, Jose Siri has the potential to be a 25 home run guy. Yeah, well, he also has the potential to strike out 200 times, have 15 home runs, and hit 160. That's a big potential. That's probably more the potential. The guy hit 188 last year with one of the worst whiff rates in all of baseball. And we're supposed to just shut our eyes to that. He is amazing defensively. He's a unicorn defensively, and nobody could take that away from him. But I'm fine with having that if we have a power bat in left field that's established, which we don't in Brandon Nimmo. If we have a power bat at third base, and if you're moving Vientos to first, that completely changes everything. My thing is this: you bring in Pete Alonso, give him the 1-year deal at first base, give him $30 million a year, not the $22 million you're offering him. Give him the 1-year opt out. You can go get Vladdy after this year. Thank Pete for his service, but at least it allows you to say, let's find out what the hell we really have in Brett Baty. Maybe there's an injury. I mean, that's another thing. If we have an injury, we're really screwed because the bottom half of this lineup. If Vientos goes down, this whole lineup changes. God forbid Soto goes down, this entire lineup changes. You need that protection, and it's not going to be Bregman. It shouldn't be Brett Baty. Get Pete Alonso back here on a short-term contract. Enough is enough with this stuff. All right, we got this from Jake again. Yeah, everyone said last year rotation stunk, and then we're incredible. If Clay Holmes works out, I agree with you. I love the Clay Holmes move. I don't think he's ever going to be a stud, but I think he could be a mid-3 guy, big sinker ball guy. And if you move Vientos over to first base, get a better defender at third, I think it'll work out better for him because of that sinker ball that he throws. We have this from Klub. Klub, thanks for always chiming in, my guy. So many question marks on this team. I agree with you. Richard, remove Soto. We are bottom 10. You could, I guess, argue that. What's going on, Harrison? Hope you're doing well, my friend. So our Alonso contract talks off or on again? Robert. Supposedly, I believe it was Robert Murray reported that the Mets have not completely shut the door. I will get to a couple more of your guys' comments. I want to pull up a video that I have saved from today. It's pretty much the Anthony Santander contract. What kind of effect is it going to have on this current team? It's coming via SNY. Let me pull it up for you guys really quick. And hold on one sec for me. Pull it up really quick. All right, here we go. Let's give it a listen and we'll react and then we'll get to some more comments.
One of the names we've been hearing about recent days, Anthony Santander, could he become a member of the Mets? Well, that's not going to happen because he signed with the Blue Jays over $90 million, Jim Duquette. What does that mean for Pete Alonso? Do you think that plays into the equation now that Santander is off the board for the Mets?
Well, I don't know, Gary, if the contract is going to be relevant. Obviously he plays the outfield, but, in terms of offensive players, his AAV after some of the deferred comp was as low as $14 million I saw, which is really an incredible number. I think the more relevant number is maybe the $90 million of total that he signed, $92 million, whatever that was. But in terms of whether Toronto, which was a rumored destination spot for Alonso, and either they would move Vladdy Jr. over to third or even consider trading Guerrero, that's out of the equation now, I think, with Toronto. They don't need, at least their opinion is, they say they're going to be in on the offensive side, but it doesn't seem like they're in for Pete Alonso at this point. Changes what they're looking for. So, I think another team that may have had interest in Pete is off the board. Going back to what Anthony was saying, now you start looking at, okay, well, is it the Angels? Is it the Giants? Where's the mystery team that the Mets are supposedly competing for his services?
And that's what you have from there. I don't think because they signed Santander, they're guaranteed to keep Vladdy. They'd be dumb if, I know they want to win this year, supposedly, but if he's not willing to sign an extension, you're going to let him walk for nothing. You're going to qualify offer him and let him walk and get a potential first round pick later on down the road. Doesn't make any sense to me. Klub, what's the name of your other show? We sometimes do Spaces. We did Spaces for a long time. We brought guests on there, but unfortunately, some people don't know how to act on X Spaces, and sometimes we alienate some of our guests. So I decided that we're not doing that anymore. It was more of a conversational environment. I'd have a guest on. We had Terry Collins on. With a host and stuff, bring people in to ask questions. But unfortunately, too many people don't know how to behave themselves on there. So we now bring our guests on here where it's one-on-one and I can read your comments because I enjoy having these people on. Pat was even on one of our spaces one time. Had a lot of fun. Adam, Pat was just on for 45 minutes. Feel free to go back and check it out there. We got this from Ant-Man. Ant-Man, you some of you guys are just so obsessed with this Rizzo thing. Leave Rizzo alone. I say get Rizzo for defense and another lefty. Rizzo was so washed last year. You know what? Matter of fact, Anthony Rizzo. Let's look up his stats last year so people could just absolutely stop with this nonsense. Here we go. I'll put it up on the screen for you guys. I don't want to hear anything about Rizzo. Here we go. Last year, Anthony Rizzo. Oh my gosh. This is beyond brutal. Even the advanced stats don't favor him. Here you go. I'll give you your guys' standard. 637 OPS. Right there. 637 OPS. Hell no. Hell no. I hope that answers your question, my guy. I appreciate you chiming in, though. Always appreciate you guys chiming in. I wanted to get Pat's opinion on the Tanner Scott, Kirby Yates, Minter situation. And I like Minter. But again, how many times are we going to be shopping at the Payless store? It's one thing to say we're going to spend money, and I appreciate Steve Cohen spending money, and I go to a ton of games. I'm sure you guys do too. I pay the extra parking. I don't care. I go. I've dragged my 9-month pregnant wife to the games. That's how much we care. But spending a ton of money in the clearance section, you still spend $300, but you just got a lot of stuff for it. I'd rather have the top of the top than a couple of quality. That's one thing David Stearns is bringing over from Milwaukee. And I think we can complain all we want, including myself, who does it probably more than anybody else. He values quantity over quality. Clearly. That's me. Scott, I agree. Pete is running out of first base options. MC Clutch, appreciate you chime in. You always chime in. I would give Beatty one more year. If he doesn't produce, he's done. But here's my issue with that scenario. As it stands right now, Brett Beatty has value. Regardless if you or I disagree with that, he does. The New York Mets literally have him as their plan B at third base this year. He clearly has value. Maybe he was a first round pick, a high first round pick. Remember this, when he came out a few years ago, he was 19. They said, oh, he would have no doubt been a top 5 pick. He had the best hit tool in the class, but he was 1 year older than everybody in the class. Wilfredo Ruiz, I know. Brett Beatty needs to be included in a trade package for a productive player. Maybe he'd be a starting pitcher. I know I can't be the only one screaming for a front-end starter. Scott, Flaherty or Castillo? Flaherty's out there. Matter of fact, I have time with you guys. Let's look it up. Jack Flaherty, another guy who struggles to stay healthy, but guys, look at his year last year. Guys like this don't just grow on trees. Let me show this for you guys. I mean, 162 innings pitched, 194 strikeouts per strikeout. KP9 is going to be great. 28 games, 3.17. He had a better year than Minaya. And it's not even close. Not even close. Now, look, and this happens a lot, and I don't want to get on him, but once he was traded from Detroit, he didn't have nearly as good a year, 3.58, but that's right around what Minaya had last year. I wonder what his I got to look at his full KP9 for the season. Get these darn ads out of here. Here we go. 10.8 KP9. Even after he got traded, 9.9 KP9. Sign me the hell up. And he's 29. 4 for 100. Sign me up. I just seen an article made right before I came on here that he may be turning away from the Dodgers. Sign me up. I'd rather, now that I'm really thinking about it, get me Flaherty over Castillo. Doesn't cost you any prospects. You keep all your prospects because we all know, and this is one thing, I know Pat made this point. He said, well, the Mets might add at the trade deadline. Here's my issue with that. And it's a very clear issue. Look at what a guy like Rogers from the Marlins cost last year. Look what Tanner Scott cost. I believe the Padres gave up their number 2, 6, and 9 or 10. So 2, 6, and 9 overall prospects for Tanner Scott, 3 months of a closer. Now you're talking about starting pitchers. They go for an absolute fortune. You now, more than ever, do you have to go into the major league season with a ready roster. Because of that extra wild card, that adds about 2 to 3 teams in each league. The American League, forget about it. Everybody's going to feel like they have a shot this year. Because outside of the Yankees, outside of Baltimore, outside of Houston, those 3 teams, anybody can make it. You might have 3 teams make it out of the East. And maybe that's why Toronto feels that they have a shot. But that's what we're talking about. All these teams now think they have a shot. So you're really dealing with maybe 5 or 6 teams at the trade deadline who legitimately think they're out and willing to sell. That's why Flaherty went for so much. That's why Tanner Scott went for so much. That's why Rogers, who's got a 5 ERA with the Marlins, went for a crap ton. He sucks. Absolutely sucks. Call a spade a spade. And what these guys were going for last year was scary. Zach, here's one of our admins, Zach. And Zach actually helps me run our Metcast group chat over on X. I believe we have like 150, almost 200 people in that group chat. If you're interested and want to join that group chat, first subscribe to us on YouTube. Message me on Metcast at X. I leave the DMs open. We get a lot of them. And if you want to be a part of the group chat, we do a little bit of vetting on you, and then we allow you in. It's a lot of fun. We try to keep it positive. If you're crazy negative, we warn you and then we hiatus you out of there. Zach will attest to that. Ray, I know you want a full-time DH. This team is not built for a full-time DH. Yes, just look at the Nimmo injury. Must be worse. And now we're pivoting. That's why I'm saying Jurickson Profar is a perfect fit for this team. Matter of fact, let's look up his stats while we're sitting here. Last year, 280, 24 homers, 85 RBIs, 158 hits. 31 years old. He'll be going into his age 32 season. Yep. Sign me up. Sign me the hell up. All right, we got this from Jim. Jim, appreciate you checking it out on Facebook. Guys, give us a follow on Facebook. That's the best way to help us grow if you want to help us grow. There's too many ifs and question marks on this team. We are the third best team in the East at best. I agree. And that was my point to Pat. That was my absolute point to Pat. Patrick Beatty will never make it. He can't handle it. All right, we're going to get to, I have another video. Terry Collins talks about Carlos Beltran missing out on the Hall of Fame again. I think he's a Hall of Famer. He'll probably go in as an Astro if you ask me, but let's listen to Terry, the guys at SNY break it down. It's really interesting. You had the Hall of Fame vote today. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. We'll get to some comments right after this.
TC, no Beltran. That's it. So it's going to be Ichiro, CC, and Wagner as the three that will get in for this class of 2025. Your initial thoughts on Beltran getting snubbed yet again?
Well, I think both Anthony and Laura brought it up. This Astros thing has gotten out of control now. The Hall of Fame are filled with guys who knew what pitches were coming at certain times. So, I'm a little tired of hearing and him being held accountable to be the only guy who was a player at the time. Like Laura said, he wasn't even a starting player. It's not like he benefited from what was going on. I think he's being overly penalized. He lost a managerial job because of this. He's paid his price. He's a Hall of Fame player. He needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'm with you, TC. Like, come on, what are we doing here? And we talked about this before with Beltran, 100%. Before we got the results. If you're a Hall of Fame player, you're a Hall of Fame player. I think Beltran is that. What he did, I mean, this is not, McGuire, Bonds, Clemens, PED stuff. Your thoughts on Beltran and not getting it again?
It's a great point by Terry. The man already was publicly mentioned as the ringleader of this thing, whether that's actually.
I agree. I think the Astros thing is absolutely killing him. Look, Bonds isn't getting in. These guys who cheated or assisted and cheated, they're not getting in. But let's be honest. If you think, and I got to put allegedly because I don't want to get a lawsuit against me or have my channel completely thrown out. But allegedly, guys like David Ortiz and Manny Ramirez were on the alleged Mitchell report. Let's keep it a spade here. If you think guys are in the Hall of Fame and nobody's ever done PEDs or anything to enhance their game, I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn.
True or not, we don't know that.
Let me know if you guys think Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame or A-Rod. I don't think A-Rod sued baseball. He was the first guy ever to receive a lifetime suspension. I actually don't. I'm one of those guys who don't think any guys at PEDs should be in the Hall of Fame. But now I'm also recognizing there's guys that are definitely in there that did them. But I think all-time records need to be preserved for the all-time clean guys. Like if Ohtani's too old now, but whoever breaks the home run record, it shouldn't be Barry Bonds' record. But maybe you guys think different. Let me know in the comments.
But he's also lost a managerial job because of it. So he's been punished enough. I mean, in my mind, I've been voting for him since he got on the ballot. I think the career speaks for itself in terms of where he ranks as a player. He should be in there. I mean, I can only hope that we can say next year, how close is he now? He must have moved forward.
70%. He finished around 70%.
Okay, so that's higher. I think he was 64-ish last year.
Okay, 5%. Obviously, he gets
he'll get in next year.
5% of the vote. You feel more encouraged with that?
I do think it'll happen.
I'll say this. How about Ichiro Suzuki? One reporter did not put him in the Hall of Fame. One writer. Why is it always like that? It's not about these writers. It just ticks me off. Alberto, shout out to you. What would it take to get the White Sox center fielder? I actually did a trade proposal on that. Let me see if I can look it up really quick. Let's see. You know what? I'm not going to have time to look it up right now, but I'll go through it. I'll post it on my X again. I'd be very interested in him. Down year last year, $20 million this year, next year, and the following year, but they're all club options. I don't know if they'd be willing to give it, but, you know, Ant-Man, I agree. He can't stay healthy, but at this point, he's their best option. We got Gary King. Give me flattery. We need one more starter. Also, bring back Stanek. I agree. Stanek, remember, Pat just said, shout out to the Mets, their staff, their physical therapy staff and all that. They helped him with that back issue that he had going on. Ant-Man, Braves are broke. They're in panic. But I disagree. They got Acuna coming back. And they're also cranking out guys left and right. They have one of the top pitching prospects in all baseball who will be up this year. I think they'll be just fine. Master of Coin. I can't take this. I don't want Alonso back, but it's getting late, early, and we need him. I agree. Richard, agree. Profar and Stanek, Alonso, Flaherty. That, Richard, I'm going to make a tweet about that. I'm going to save that for later. I agree. There's the rest of your offseason. Profar, Alonso. Now all of a sudden that lengthens that lineup, Stanek and Flaherty. I would still like to see one more bullpen arm, but I get it. You have what about Jerks and Profar and left and move them to first? I just don't. If Nimmo's got feet issues, I don't know if he'll be on the balls, his tippy toes while playing first base. B Mac, what's your opinion on this stat being passed around called RE24? Supposedly ranks players offensively by more accurately tracking their contributions. Put Soto number 3 in MLB, Lindor 12 and Alonso 73rd. I don't know. I got to look into that. I'll take a peek into that. Catch you on the next live stream with that one. I haven't necessarily heard that one as of yet. Let's see what else I got here. I definitely have something else I wanted to go over. Oh, how can we not? We'll finish off the live stream with this. What an awesome video. This is Billy Wagner getting the news that he's making the Hall of Fame.
Hello? This is him.
Uniqueness. Here's a look at what made Ichiro. Behold the warrior.
How freaking cool.
Eyes focused. The mind like a mountain lake. Calm. Clear. Deep. That's a flash of the past.
How sick.
Thank you.
All right, that's pretty much it. But shout out to Billy Wagner. He's probably going to go in as with the Houston hat on, in my opinion. Klub, we do not have any fantasy leagues. Maybe do it next year. And Boris should be in the Hall of Fame. I agree. That's hysterical. But guys, I appreciate you all sticking around. We will have another live stream. Maybe at the end of this week, if Pete Alonso signs, we'll be on again. We are your alternate YouTube channel, I like to say. There's a lot of YouTubers out there. We appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with us. We're not your average Joe YouTube podcaster. I'm just a fan just like you guys. If you could kindly like this video, share it with a friend if you want to help us grow. Give us a follow on Facebook and over at X. And until next time, catch you later.